Captain James Callahan had been on countless missions across distant planets, but none had prepared him for the day he found her. It was a typical scouting mission to a remote alien world, a place on the far edge of the galaxy where humans had little contact with the local inhabitants. Callahan's orders were simple: explore the area, gather data, and report back. What he hadn't expected was to encounter something, or someone, that would change everything. The planet's surface was rugged, barren, with harsh winds that kicked up the dust in all directions. The ground was cracked and dry, and the only sounds that filled the air were the eerie howls of distant creatures. Callahan's boots crunched on the rocky earth as he moved through the landscape, scanning his surroundings with the equipment strapped to his suit. The mission was supposed to be quiet, but his instincts told him there was more going on here than met the eye. As he moved deeper into the terrain, he noticed something strange in the distance, a figure, small and hunched, barely visible among the rocks. At first, he thought it was an animal, perhaps some creature he hadn't encountered before. But as he approached, the figure became clearer, and to his surprise, it was a woman. She was chained, lying weakly on the ground, her eyes closed, but her breathing steady. Her skin was pale, with a soft shimmer to it that reflected the dim light of the planet's distant sun. Her hair was long and white, contrasting sharply with the rough environment around her. Callahan hesitated for a moment. He didn't know what to make of her. Was she a native of this planet, or some kind of strange creature, like the ones often found in these wild corners of space? Regardless, she was clearly in distress, and Callahan was a soldier who was trained to help, even when it was hard to know how. He approached cautiously, his hand hovering near the weapon at his side. There were no signs of immediate danger, no strange sounds or movement, just the stillness of the woman lying there, chained as if left to die. "Hey," Callahan called softly, kneeling beside her. "Are you all right?" Her eyes fluttered open, slowly, and then focused on him. Callahan could see a mix of confusion and fear in her gaze. She didn't respond, not in words at least. She tried to move but winced in pain as the chains tugged on her limbs. Callahan frowned. It wasn't clear who had left her here or why, but she was clearly someone in need of help. He reached for the chains, examining them closely. They were unlike anything he'd seen before, strange, metallic, with intricate symbols carved into them. They didn't seem like the work of any known species. He carefully tried to unlock them, but the mechanisms were complicated, unlike anything he could easily understand. After a few moments of struggle, he managed to get one of the chains loose, and then another. As he worked to free her, the woman's eyes never left him. Callahan couldn't tell if she was scared or just too weak to respond. She looked fragile. But there was something about her presence, something that didn't seem right with the simple assumption he had made at first. She didn't seem like a mere animal, not with the way she watched him so intensely. She had an air of intelligence about her, something he hadn't expected. "Who did this to you?" Callahan asked, his voice steady despite the curiosity building within him. The woman didn't speak. Instead, she seemed to gather what little strength she had left and gave him a small, uncertain nod. Callahan could see that she was struggling to hold herself up. Her appearance seemed otherworldly, but something about her eyes, a mix of fear and intelligence, told him there was more to her than met the eye. He finally managed to free her completely, and she sat up slowly, still weak but now able to move without the chains holding her back. She didn't say anything, but her expression shifted from one of confusion to something more akin to relief. As she looked up at him, Callahan felt a strange sense of responsibility stir within him. He had been trained for battles, to fight in wars, to survive in the harshest conditions. But here, with this woman, things felt different. Before Callahan could say anything more, the woman spoke, but only a single word escaped her lips, her voice soft, yet filled with emotion. "Thank you." That simple thank you, spoken in a language he didn't understand, sent a ripple of confusion through Callahan. He had assumed she was nothing but a prisoner, perhaps an animal or servant. But her eyes, her words, and the very presence she held, it was clear she was not what he had expected. This wasn't going to be as simple as he thought. Captain Callahan watched as the woman sat up slowly, her body still trembling from the effects of the chains and her time in captivity. She looked at him with a mixture of confusion and gratitude, her pale blue eyes wide but clear. She was still weak, but there was something powerful about her presence. Callahan could see that she wasn't just any ordinary person or creature. She was different, more than he had first assumed. "Are you okay?" Callahan asked, his voice soft yet filled with concern. The woman nodded slowly, though she winced as she shifted her position. Her body was clearly sore, her movements stiff and careful. Callahan could see that the chains had left marks on her wrists and ankles. He didn't know where she had come from or what kind of life she had lived, but it was clear she had been through something terrible. He didn't know what to do next. His orders were to survey the planet and gather information, not to care for prisoners or whatever this woman was. But now that he had helped her, there was a strange feeling inside him. The duty of a soldier was clear, but so was the impulse to protect someone who had clearly been wronged. Callahan glanced around, taking in the desolate surroundings. There was nothing for miles except jagged rocks and dust. The woman had no place to go. If he left her here, who knew what would happen to her? The thought of abandoning her didn't sit well with him. Without much of a plan, he stood up and extended his hand toward her. "Come on," he said gently. "We need to get somewhere safer. You need to rest." The woman hesitated for a moment before looking at his hand, then slowly reaching out to take it. Her skin felt cold and delicate against his, but there was strength in her grip. She didn't say anything as she took his hand, but her eyes seemed to say everything. She trusted him, even though he was a stranger. Callahan helped her to her feet, supporting her as she stood, her legs shaky, but gradually gaining strength. Her clothes were torn, and she seemed disoriented, but she wasn't entirely helpless. There was a fire in her eyes, a determination that Callahan couldn't ignore. She might have been a prisoner, but there was something more to her than he realized. They walked slowly through the barren landscape, Callahan scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. There was nothing here but the wind and the endless dust, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something else was out there, something hidden beneath the surface of this lonely planet. As they walked, Callahan couldn't help but glance at the woman beside him. Her long white hair fluttered in the wind, and her pale skin seemed almost ethereal under the faint light of the distant sun. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen before. There was a quiet elegance about her, even in her weakened state. But it wasn't just her appearance that intrigued him. It was the way she carried herself. She didn't seem frightened, even after everything she had been through. There was something regal in the way she moved, a calm confidence that contrasted sharply with her current situation. After some time, they came upon a small cave, a natural shelter from the harsh winds. Callahan led her inside, setting up a small campfire with supplies from his pack. He didn't know how long they would have to stay here, but it was the best he could do for now. As he worked, he kept glancing at the woman, who was sitting quietly by the fire, her eyes distant but not unfocused. "Do you want something to eat?" Callahan asked, pulling out a ration pack. She didn't respond at first, and he was about to offer her the food anyway when she finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I am not a pet," she said quietly, almost as if she were thinking out loud. "I am not an animal." Callahan froze, his hand stilling in the middle of unpacking his supplies. He had assumed she was a servant or something less, something that had been captured or discarded. But her words stung him, reminding him of his initial thoughts about her. He hadn't meant to insult her, but he could tell that she had felt the sting of his assumptions. "I didn't think," he began, unsure of how to continue. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to treat you like that." The woman looked up at him, her eyes now filled with something different. There was no anger in them, only a quiet understanding. "You don't know me. You don't know who I am." Callahan nodded slowly. She was right. He didn't know anything about her. Not yet. But he knew that she wasn't just some captured pet. There was more to her than that, and it was time he started paying attention. The silence between them stretched on for a while, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the beginning of something new, something neither of them had expected. As Callahan sat down beside her, he realized that he had made a terrible mistake in assuming her weakness. This woman, The days that followed were quiet, yet filled with a strange tension between Captain Callahan and the woman he had rescued. They settled into a routine in the small cave, with Callahan continuing to check the planet's surface and gather data while the woman, whom he had learned was named Sarah, rested. She was healing, but the road to full recovery would take time. The more he watched her, the more he began to notice things that didn't add up with what he had initially assumed. Sarah was not the frightened, helpless person she had seemed at first. Though her body was still frail, her mind was sharp. She would often sit for hours, staring into the distance, her pale blue eyes focused on something far beyond the cave. Occasionally, she would speak in a soft language that Callahan didn't understand, but it was clear from her tone that she was trying to express something important. Despite the fact that she was still weak, there was a quiet strength in the way she carried herself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Callahan sat across from Sarah by the fire, trying to make sense of the situation. They had been silent for most of the day, both lost in their own thoughts. Callahan found himself increasingly curious about her, about who she was and where she came from. He had assumed she was just a prisoner, some captive alien, but the longer they spent together, the more he realized how wrong he had been. "Sarah," he said slowly, breaking the silence. "Where are you from? I mean before all this, before you were captured." She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, there was no answer. Then, quietly, she began to speak in her native language. Callahan didn't understand the words, but the tone in her voice was different. There was a sense of pride in it, a kind of reverence for whatever world she was describing. I don't know if you will understand," Sarah said after a long pause, her voice soft but clear. "I come from a place far from here. My people, we live by honor, by strength. We are not like you." Callahan listened intently, sensing that this was the first time she had truly opened up to him. He didn't interrupt, giving her the space to speak. "My family, they are of great importance," she continued, her eyes distant as if she were reliving memories. "I am the daughter of a lord, a ruler of many worlds. I was raised to be strong, to lead. But I was taken. I was betrayed, captured, and sold." Callahan was stunned. The way she spoke was so calm, as if she had already made peace with the loss. But Callahan could see the pain in her eyes. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was royalty. "Your family," he began carefully. "Are they coming for you?" Sarah shook her head, the sadness in her eyes deepening. "No. I was abandoned. They believed I was lost." Her voice faltered for just a moment, but then she took a deep breath and looked at him with steady eyes. "I was nothing to them." Callahan felt a pang of guilt. He had assumed she was nothing more than an animal or servant, someone of no importance. But now he realized the truth. She was someone with a past, someone who had once held great power. And yet she was here now, with him, alone and far from the world she once knew. There was a long silence between them as they both sat by the fire, the crackling flames filling the space. Callahan couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility toward her, a deepening respect for the woman sitting across from him. She had been through so much, yet she carried herself with dignity, never once begging for help or sympathy. "I'm sorry," Callahan said after a while, his voice quiet but sincere. "I didn't know. I didn't understand." Sarah looked at him, her gaze softening. "It's not your fault," she said gently. "You did not know who I was, but now you know. I will not beg for your help. I will not ask for your pity." She paused, her eyes locking with his. "But you saved me, and for that, I am grateful." Callahan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He had come to this planet expecting a simple scouting mission, never imagining that he would become entangled in the life of someone like Sarah. But now he realized that his actions had led to something far bigger than just a rescue. He was bound to her in a way he hadn't fully grasped until now. For the first time since he had met Sarah, Callahan felt the stirrings of something deeper, something more than just duty. As the fire flickered between them, he found himself questioning everything he had believed about this strange planet and its inhabitants. The more he learned about Sarah, the more he realized that the answers he sought were not in the data he was collecting, but in the woman sitting beside him. "Sarah," he said quietly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "You're not just anyone. You're a leader, a warrior. And I want to help you." The days passed quietly, with Callahan and Sarah growing more comfortable in each other's presence. They had settled into a routine, one that felt almost natural despite the strange circumstances. The fire continued to crackle in the cave as they spent their time talking about the planet, about their lives, and about things they had never shared with anyone else. Callahan still didn't know exactly who Sarah was or where she had come from, but he was starting to see a side of her that went beyond the mysterious woman he had first encountered. Sarah, for her part, was slowly revealing pieces of her past. Each time she spoke, she gave Callahan a little more of herself, and he found himself listening closely, captivated by her story. One night, as the wind howled outside the cave, Callahan and Sarah sat across from each other by the fire. The flames danced in their eyes, and for a brief moment, the world beyond the cave seemed to disappear. Sarah had been quiet for a while, lost in thought, before she finally spoke. "I told you that I am not just a prisoner," she began, her voice calm yet tinged with a sadness that Callahan couldn't ignore. "But there's more I haven't told you." Callahan looked up from the fire, his attention fixed on her. "You don't have to tell me if you're not ready," he said gently. She shook her head. "No, I want you to understand. I wasn't just captured. I was betrayed. My own people sold me into slavery. They wanted me out of the way, so they could take control of everything." Her eyes darkened as she spoke, the pain in her voice evident. "I had no choice but to accept my fate, even though it was the worst thing that could ever happen." Callahan could sense the weight of her words. He had known that she was royalty, but the way she described the betrayal made it clear that her world had been far more complex than he could have imagined. She wasn't just a princess or a noblewoman. She was someone who had lost everything she knew in one cruel blow. "I don't understand," Callahan said quietly. "Why would your people do this to you?" Sarah looked down, her fingers idly tracing the fabric of her torn clothes. "It was political," she explained. "My father, the lord of our people, had enemies. There were those who wanted his power, his lands, and they thought that by getting rid of me, they could weaken him. They believed I was a threat because of my position. I was too young to rule, but I could have been an obstacle. So they did what they had to do." Callahan felt a pang of sympathy for her. He had always heard of power struggles, of leaders who betrayed their own for the sake of ambition. But hearing it from Sarah, seeing the pain in her eyes, made him realize just how personal these betrayals were. "Your father doesn't care?" he asked cautiously. Zara's expression softened for a moment, but the sadness remained. "He didn't even search for me," she said softly. "He believed I was dead. They told him I had been killed in an attack, and he never questioned it. I had no choice but to accept the lie. I was nothing to him, nothing more than a pawn in their game." The silence between them grew heavy, the crackling of the fire the only sound breaking it. Callahan struggled to find the right words. He could hardly imagine the pain Sarah must have felt, betrayed by those she loved, abandoned by her own father. "I'm sorry," Callahan said after a long pause. "No one should go through that." Sarah gave a small, almost bitter laugh. "It's not your fault, Captain," she replied. "I'm the one who's been foolish. I believed in my family, believed in my place in the world. And now look where I am, on a strange planet with nothing left." Callahan shook his head, refusing to accept her view of the situation. "You're not nothing. You're more than that. You're strong, Sarah. You've survived all of this, even when everything seemed against you." She looked at him, her blue eyes softening slightly. "Surviving isn't enough," she said quietly. "I want more than just survival. I want my people to see me as something more than a lost cause. I want to prove them wrong." Callahan felt a surge of determination rise within him. He had never thought of himself as someone who could change the course of events, but now, with Sarah's words hanging in the air, he felt something stirring inside him. He had a duty to help her, not just because he had rescued her, but because he believed in her. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," Callahan said firmly. "You've already shown more courage than anyone could ever expect. I'll help you get home, Sarah. I'll help you take back what's yours." For the first time, Sarah's expression softened, and a faint, hopeful smile played at the corners of her lips. "You would help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," Callahan replied. "You don't have to do this alone." The days that followed were filled with planning and preparation. Callahan and Sarah had begun to make their way across the planet's desolate surface, heading toward what Sarah described as a hidden fortress, a place where she believed her family's loyal followers might be. But as they traveled, Callahan began to sense a change in the air. The more time he spent with Tara, the more he realized just how complicated her past was, and how much more was at stake than he had initially understood. One night, as they sat around a fire, Callahan glanced at Sarah, who was gazing at the stars above them, lost in thought. The firelight flickered across her face, casting shadows that seemed to mirror the unease he felt. He had known from the beginning that this mission was far from ordinary, but it was becoming clear that there was more to Sarah's story than he could have imagined. "You've told me a lot about your family, Sarah," Callahan said, his voice breaking the silence. "But you haven't really told me what you plan to do when we get to this fortress. Are you going to confront them?" Sarah turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. She was quiet for a moment before answering, her voice steady. "I don't know yet. Part of me wants to confront them, to make them see me for who I really am. But another part of me, I'm afraid I won't be able to. I'm afraid they'll still see me as nothing more than a burden." Callahan frowned, his mind racing with the implications of her words. Sarah had already lost so much, and the idea that she might be rejected again was unbearable to him. He had seen her strength, the quiet confidence she carried despite everything that had happened to her. He knew she wasn't just a princess. She was a leader, someone who had been forced to play a role she hadn't chosen. But what if it wasn't enough? What if her family still saw her as weak? "Whatever happens, Sarah," Callahan said, his voice firm, "I'm with you, no matter what." She gave him a small, appreciative smile, but said nothing. It was clear she was still lost in her thoughts, wondering what her future would hold once they reached her family's stronghold. Callahan felt a growing sense of unease, unsure of what kind of welcome they would find. Then, out of nowhere, Sarah spoke again, and her words caught him completely off guard. "Callahan," she said quietly, her tone serious, "there's something I need to tell you." He turned toward her, sensing the gravity in her voice. "What is it?" Sarah took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for something difficult. "When I was taken, I was promised something I never thought I would need. But now, I realize that it might be the only way for me to gain the respect I deserve from my people." Callahan's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I was promised in marriage," she said, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "Not just to anyone, but to someone of power, someone who could secure my position and make my claim to the throne stronger. I never believed I would need it, but now I see that it might be the only way to restore what I've lost." Callahan's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if he had heard her correctly. "Marriage? To who?" "To me," Sarah said, her eyes locking with his. For a long moment, Callahan was silent, his mind struggling to process what she had just said. He had known there was a bond between them, a growing connection that seemed to deepen with every passing day. But this was something completely unexpected. Sarah looked away, her gaze shifting to the fire as if she couldn't bear to look at him. "I know it sounds strange, but in my world, marriage is a binding contract, a way to unite families, to solidify power. If I am to reclaim my place, I will need an alliance, and there's no stronger alliance than one made through marriage." Callahan's mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. He had come to respect and care for Sarah deeply, but this was something he hadn't anticipated. He was just a soldier, a man from a distant world, nothing like the powerful lords and ladies she spoke of. He had no idea what it meant to be part of such an arrangement. But one thing was clear. Sarah was asking for something serious. "I'm not sure I understand," Callahan admitted. "Are you asking me to marry you, Sarah?" She nodded, her expression unreadable. "I am. I don't expect you to love me. I don't even know if I love you in the way you might think. But I need someone who will stand with me, who will give me the strength I need to reclaim my place, someone who will help me take back what was stolen from me." Callahan's thoughts swirled, but he could see the determination in her eyes. He had always known that Sarah was strong, but hearing her voice crack as she spoke about her past and her hopes for the future made him realize just how much was at stake for her. This wasn't just a request. It was a desperate plea for help. The days following Sarah's surprising proposal were filled with a new kind of tension. As they continued their journey through the rugged landscape, Callahan couldn't shake the weight of what she had asked. Marriage. He had known from the start that Sarah was unlike anyone he had ever met. But this request, this binding contract between their worlds, had caught him completely off guard. He wasn't sure what to make of it. He had always seen marriage as something sacred, something between two people who loved and trusted each other. But Sarah wasn't asking for love. She was asking for strength, for an alliance. And yet, as strange as it seemed, Callahan couldn't deny that he felt something deeper growing between them. The bond they had forged in the fire of survival was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The air between them was thick with unspoken thoughts. Sarah seemed content with the silence, her thoughts focused on the journey ahead. Callahan, on the other hand, was consumed by doubt and confusion. What was he really agreeing to? He wasn't sure he understood the full extent of what it meant to marry into Sarah's world, but one thing was clear. If he agreed, it would change everything. A few days later, they reached the outskirts of what Sarah had described as her family's stronghold. The fortress, hidden deep within a mountain range, loomed ahead of them. It was an imposing structure, built to withstand the harshest of conditions, with high walls and towers that seemed to touch the sky. Callahan could feel the weight of Sarah's past pressing down on him as they approached. This was it, the place where everything she had lost could either be regained or permanently lost. As they made their way closer, Sarah's mood shifted. The quiet confidence that had carried her through the journey seemed to fade, replaced by a subtle anxiety. She glanced at Callahan, her expression uncertain for the first time since they had met. "I've been here before," she said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "But it feels different now. I'm not the person I was when I left." Callahan nodded, understanding more than she realized. He didn't need to ask her what she meant. He could see it in her eyes, the weight of the past, the memories that haunted her. It wasn't just the betrayal that had hurt her. It was everything she had once believed about herself, about her place in the world. "I'm here with you," Callahan said, his voice steady. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Zara smiled faintly, though the sadness in her eyes remained. As they entered the fortress, the atmosphere shifted again. Callahan could feel the tension in the air, as if the very walls were watching them. They were met by a small group of guards who eyed them warily but made no move to stop them. Sarah spoke briefly to the leader, a man who looked to be in his mid-30s, with the same pale blue skin and sharp features as her own. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "You've returned," the man said, his tone neutral, but there was an edge to his words. "And you've brought a human." Zara's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't react to the comment. She stood tall, her posture regal, despite the doubt and fear swirling inside her. "This is Captain Callahan," she said, her voice firm. "He is here to help me." The guard's gaze shifted to Callahan, studying him with a mix of curiosity and distrust. "Help you," he repeated, his eyes narrowing. "With what exactly?" Before Sarah could respond, Callahan stepped forward, sensing the growing tension. He wasn't sure if it was the right move, but he wasn't about to stand by and let Sarah face this alone. He had already made his decision to support her, and he would make sure they knew it. "We've come here to set things right," Callahan said, his voice clear. "Whatever your issues are with Tara, I'm here to help. She's not the same person you remember." The guard scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest. "She's a pawn, a tool. You can't possibly understand the politics here." Callahan's eyes flashed. "I don't need to understand your politics. I understand loyalty. I understand strength, and I understand that Sarah deserves better than being treated like a tool." The guard's expression hardened, but before he could respond, Sarah stepped forward, raising her hand to stop him. "Enough," she said, her voice surprisingly calm but laced with authority. "Captain Callahan is right. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking for what's rightfully mine. And I will not let anyone deny me my place." There was a long silence as the guards exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. Finally, the leader of the group stepped aside, his face unreadable. "Very well," he said coldly. "You will meet with the council. But understand this. There are many here who still do not trust you, Shara. And there are even fewer who trust him." Inside the fortress, the air felt thick with tension. Callahan could feel the weight of the stares from the guards and the soldiers who lined the hallways. Every step they took seemed to echo in the long stone corridors, and it wasn't just the cold that made the atmosphere feel so heavy. It was the uncertainty that clung to every moment. Sarah walked ahead of him with her head held high, but Callahan could sense the unease behind her calm exterior. He knew that she had not returned home as a daughter expecting to be welcomed. No, she had come back as someone with a point to prove. The council chamber was vast, its high ceilings and intricate stonework giving it a grand, imposing look. Sarah led him inside, her presence immediately drawing the attention of everyone present. There were 8 figures seated around a large, circular table, their expressions stern and serious. Some looked at Sarah with skepticism, others with thinly veiled disdain. Callahan could see the weight of their gazes and the discomfort in Sarah's posture, despite the brave face she put on. She stood tall as she addressed them. "I have returned, as I promised," Sarah said, her voice strong and unwavering. "I come not as a broken prisoner, but as the rightful heir. I ask that you hear me, and judge me not for what I was, but for what I am now." There was a long silence before one of the council members, a tall man with sharp features and silver hair, spoke. "You have returned, but you return with a human. Why have you brought him here, Sarah?" Sarah turned toward Callahan, her eyes meeting his. In that moment, he could see that this wasn't just about her reclaiming her position. It was about everything she had lost and everything she had fought for. He stepped forward, his voice steady and firm. "This man, Captain Callahan, is the reason I stand here today. He rescued me. He has protected me. And he has shown more loyalty than anyone in this room." Sarah said, her gaze unwavering. "I trust him, and I ask that you do the same." The council members exchanged wary glances, some of them murmuring among themselves. Callahan stood still, the tension rising with every passing second. He knew that this wasn't just about a soldier helping a prisoner. It was about breaking down centuries of tradition, of power, and of hierarchy. Sarah's world didn't just operate on alliances. It ran on old laws that saw loyalty and respect as something earned through blood, not actions. One of the council members, a woman with dark hair and piercing eyes, spoke up. "Your return may be a surprise to some of us, but this human, he has no place in our affairs. You cannot expect us to simply accept him." "Sarah, I don't expect anything from you," Chara replied, her tone sharp, yet measured. "But I will not let anyone underestimate the loyalty and strength I have earned, both from this man and from myself." The council member scoffed. "Loyalty? From a human? Do you truly believe that someone from another world can understand the depths of our culture, our history? He cannot stand with us." Callahan's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer to the table, his voice rising. "I may not understand your customs or your history, but I understand respect. I understand loyalty. And I know what it means to stand by someone who deserves it. Sarah is not just your princess. She is your future. She has the strength to lead you, and I will stand by her no matter what you say." The room fell into silence again, the air so thick with tension it was almost suffocating. Sarah remained silent, watching the council closely. It was clear that she was waiting for something, but what Callahan wasn't sure. She had led them this far, but would they accept her? Would they accept him? Finally, the man with silver hair spoke again, his voice low but carrying an air of finality. "You speak of loyalty, Captain Callahan, but what you fail to understand is that loyalty isn't just given, it is earned. Your presence here may change the course of Sarah's future, but we have seen many come and go. Prove that you are more than just a soldier. Prove that you have something to offer beyond words." Callahan's heart raced. This was it, the moment he had been dreading. He knew that the council wouldn't just accept him, they would test him. But how? What did they expect from a man like him? He wasn't a ruler, a noble, or even a warrior like they were. He was just a soldier. Zara, sensing the tension mounting, turned to Callahan and gave him a small, encouraging nod. He took a deep breath, and then, without thinking twice, he spoke with all the conviction he could muster. The silence that followed the council's decision felt like a heavy weight pressing down on Callahan's chest. He stood there, unmoving, as the council members exchanged quiet words among themselves. Sarah stood beside him, her expression unreadable, but he could feel the tension radiating off her. They were in the lion's den now, and the eyes of the council were upon them, weighing their every word and action. After what seemed like an eternity, the council leader with the silver hair finally spoke, his voice cutting through the quiet room. "Your words are bold, Captain Callahan," he said. "But words are not enough in this place. You speak of loyalty, but loyalty is something that must be proven, not claimed." Callahan stood taller, meeting the man's gaze with unwavering determination. He had expected this. He had expected to be tested. But he was ready. "I understand that," Callahan replied, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not here to claim anything. I'm here to prove it." The silver-haired leader studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Callahan could feel the weight of those eyes on him. And for a moment, he wasn't sure if he had said the right thing. But then, the council leader nodded slightly, as though he had come to a decision. "Prove it then," the man said. "There is a trial, a test of strength and resolve. If you are truly worthy of standing with Sarah, you will need to pass it. Only then will we accept you as a true ally to our people." Sarah turned to Callahan, her eyes intense. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her voice low. Callahan didn't hesitate. "I didn't come this far just to back down now," he said, giving her a small, reassuring smile. "I'm ready." The council leader stood and gestured for them to follow. "Then come. The trial awaits." They were led through the winding halls of the fortress, past guards and soldiers who watched them closely. Callahan could feel the eyes of everyone on him, and he knew this wasn't just a test of strength, it was a test of everything he stood for. They reached a large open courtyard, where a group of warriors were already waiting. The warriors were armed, their faces stern and focused. They were ready for whatever challenge was about to come. Callahan's heart raced as he looked at them. He was no stranger to combat, but this was different. These were not just opponents. They were the elite of Xara's people, the ones who had stood by her family for generations. One of the warriors stepped forward, a tall man with dark, piercing eyes. "You will face us in a challenge of your choosing," he said. "If you can defeat us, then you will have proven yourself worthy." Callahan looked at Xara, who stood behind him, her face a mix of pride and concern. He knew what this meant for her. She was putting her trust in him, and he wasn't about to let her down. "I choose a test of strength," Callahan said, his voice steady. "I don't want to hide behind anything. If I'm going to prove myself, I'll do it with my fists." Xara's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't say anything. Callahan stepped forward, ready for whatever came next. The warriors surrounding him stepped into position, and the air seemed to thicken with the promise of a battle. The trial began with a sudden, brutal clash. One of the warriors lunged at Callahan, his weapon raised, but Callahan was quicker. He ducked under the swing and landed a punch squarely to the warrior's side. The blow sent the man stumbling, but he quickly recovered and launched another attack. This time, Callahan blocked it and twisted the warrior's arm, using his own momentum to throw him to the ground. The other warriors advanced, but Callahan was ready. He fought with precision, using his training and quick reflexes to outmaneuver them. The fight wasn't easy. Every strike, every block, was a test of his strength and endurance. Sweat poured down his face, and his muscles burned from the effort, but he pushed through. Xara watched from the sidelines, her eyes locked on him. Callahan could feel her gaze, a quiet strength that pushed him to fight harder, to prove that he was worthy of standing by her side. One by one, the warriors fell. It wasn't a victory won with brute force alone. Callahan had learned to fight smart, using the environment around him and his own agility to gain the upper hand. The warriors, while skilled, weren't prepared for his quick thinking and adaptability. Finally, after what seemed like hours, Callahan stood alone in the center of the courtyard, breathing heavily, his body bruised and sore. The last of the warriors lay on the ground, unable to continue. The council leader stepped forward, his expression hard to read. He looked at Callahan, then at Xara, and then nodded once. "You have proven yourself," he said, "not just with your strength, but with your resolve. You stand by Xara's side, not out of duty, but because you believe in her. That is what true loyalty looks like." The days after Callahan's victory in the trial were filled with a sense of uncertainty and anticipation. The council had accepted him, but that didn't mean his path forward was clear. The fortress, once a place of betrayal and fear for Xara, now felt different, more like a place of potential. She had proven to the council that she was not just a lost cause, and with Callahan by her side, they had shown strength, not weakness. But what did this mean for their future? The two of them sat together in a quiet room of the fortress, away from the prying eyes of the council and the soldiers. Xara was sitting by the window, staring out at the vast landscape beyond. Her gaze was distant, as if she were searching for something only she could see. Callahan watched her quietly, knowing that whatever decisions lay ahead, they would need to make them together. "I never imagined things would turn out this way," Xara said softly, breaking the silence. "When I left, I thought I'd never return. And now everything is different." Callahan nodded, understanding her words. He had been there from the beginning, helping her when she was nothing but a prisoner. Now she was fighting to reclaim her place, not just as a daughter of a powerful family, but as a leader in her own right. And he had made the choice to stand by her, to help her fight for what was hers. "You've come a long way," Callahan said. You're not the same person who arrived here. You're stronger. I can see it. Sarah turned to him, her blue eyes meeting his. And you've changed too, she said, her voice full of emotion. When I first met you, you were just a soldier, someone who didn't know anything about my world. But now, you're part of it. You've proven yourself in ways I never expected. Callahan smiled faintly. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because I believe in you. Sarah, I believe in your strength and your vision. I know what you're capable of. Sarah stood and walked over to him, her gaze intense. I know you've made sacrifices for me. You didn't have to fight that trial. You didn't have to risk your life for someone like me. But you did. And now, I need to ask you something. Callahan looked up at her, his heart pounding. He could see the seriousness in her eyes, the weight of her question pressing down on both of them. What is it? He asked quietly. I need to know, Sarah said, her voice steady. Are you truly ready for what comes next? Are you ready to stand by me, not just as an ally, but as my partner in every sense of the word? The question hung in the air, its gravity pulling at Callahan's chest. He had known that Sarah's request for marriage wasn't just about politics or alliances. It was about something deeper, something real. And now, standing before him, Sarah was asking him to make that commitment, to stand by her side as her equal, as someone who would fight with her, not just for her. Callahan took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had already made the choice to be with her, to help her reclaim her future. But this was different. This was more than just loyalty. This was a promise, a bond that would tie them together in ways neither of them could fully understand. I'm ready, he said finally, his voice clear and sure. I've been ready. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this. Whatever it is, I want to face it with you. Sarah's eyes softened, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She walked toward him, her hand reaching out to touch his. Then we'll face it together, she said softly. In that moment, Callahan felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had never been someone to shy away from a fight. But this wasn't just any fight. This was a fight for the future, for Xara's future, and for their future together. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as one. The council had accepted him, but it wasn't just their approval that mattered. It was the trust that Xara had placed in him, and the trust he had placed in her. Together, they had already overcome so much, and now they would continue to build a future, not just for themselves, but for Xara's people as well. As the sun began to set outside the window, casting a warm golden light across the room, Callahan took Xara's hand and held it tightly. The world outside was uncertain, but together they were ready to face whatever came their way. They were no longer just two strangers on a distant planet. They were partners bound by trust, loyalty, and a shared purpose. And for the first time since he had arrived on this strange world, Callahan felt that he had finally found his place.